The festive season is often regarded as warm, joyful, and meaningful. But for sensitive souls, it frequently carries exhaustion, a quiet sadness, and a pressure no one can see. Each time this period approaches, a familiar image immediately appears in the mind: cozy gatherings, laughter echoing around the dining table, well wishes exchanged, and the sense that a year should finally close in the proper way. Everywhere, we are told that this is the time to be happier, to be closer, to be more grateful. That atmosphere repeats itself year after year, gradually becoming something almost taken for granted. And you blend into that atmosphere as well. You show up where you are expected to show up. You smile when a smile is anticipated. You take part in conversations, meetings, and the familiar rituals of the holiday season, as if this were simply the natural thing to do. From the outside, nothing seems out of place. You are living in the right season, the right rhythm, the right role. But on a very deep inner level, something begins to slip slightly off. It is not exactly sadness, not exactly pain either, just a very faint, very quiet kind of tiredness, but one that lingers as if you constantly have to adjust yourself so as not to crack the shared picture. You still smile, but that smile requires more energy than usual. You are still present, but that presence does not fully come from within. It comes from an invisible obligation, the obligation to be okay. What makes this experience uncomfortable is not the festive season itself, but the subtle misalignment between the inside and the outside. You feel as though you are living in the right scene, yet not truly inside it. There are moments when you wonder, amid all the voices, laughter, and movement around you, whether anyone notices how hard you are trying just to fit in, or whether you yourself are ignoring that signal, afraid that if you stop, you will become the one who is out of sync. If this feeling is familiar, know that it is not a personal flaw. It is a kind of collective behavior, repeated very quietly every time the holidays arrive. And the real question is not, why aren't you happier? But rather, since when did you learn to set your own emotions aside, just to match the atmosphere others expect? People often assume that those who feel weighed down during the holiday season are negative, socially inept, or carrying too many unresolved emotions. But this assumption is flawed at its root. Sensitive souls do not struggle because they lack the strength to enjoy the holidays. They struggle precisely because they perceive too clearly what is happening, both what is spoken aloud and what no one mentions. A sensitive mind does not merely register the surface of the festive atmosphere. It notices the tension behind the smiles. It senses the unspoken expectations embedded in seemingly harmless well-wishes. It hears what has not yet been said, the emotions being compressed to keep everything looking okay. And when all of these signals arrive at once, the body does not respond with joy, but with fatigue. What is crucial to understand is this. This exhaustion does not come from participating too much, but from constantly adjusting yourself. You often know when to stay silent, when to smile, when to shift the topic so the atmosphere does not grow heavy. You attune to other people's moods before they themselves are even aware of them. These things happen so naturally that you rarely name them. Yet it is precisely this naturalness that prevents you from ever truly resting. Many sensitive people grow up in environments where harmony matters more than truth. They learn very early that their emotions can make others uncomfortable. That sadness should be hidden. That silence is sometimes safer than speaking. And so a psychological strategy forms, placing others' emotions first, in order to keep everything from falling apart. This strategy once helped them survive, be accepted, be loved. But in adulthood, especially during the holidays, it begins to turn into an invisible burden. Here lies the crucial reversal. You are not tired because you lack endurance. You are tired because you have endured too well for far too many years. The holidays do not create a new problem. They simply expose an old mechanism, the mechanism of erasing yourself in order to fit. When someone says this is the time to be closer, a sensitive mind does not only hear warmth, it hears responsibility. The responsibility to show up, to connect, to be joyful enough, grateful enough, positive enough, even when there is no longer any energy left inside to do those things. And what makes it even harder is that you often do not allow yourself to question this feeling. Because if you do, you fear becoming selfish, cold, or ungrateful. But the truth is, you do not have to reject the holiday season in order to acknowledge your exhaustion. You only need to look directly at the mechanism operating within you. The moment of rupture usually arrives when you realize that this heaviness is not a sign that something is wrong with you, but a sign that you have not been placed at the center of your own emotional life. You have grown accustomed to monitoring the atmosphere rather than listening to your body, accustomed to keeping everything stable rather than asking yourself what you need. And perhaps, for the first time, a new perspective opens up. What if this exhaustion is not something to be fixed, but a message? What if it does not say that you are weak, but that you have gone too long without being able to remain with yourself? That question, once asked, will not allow you to return to the old way again. Not all egos are loud. There is a form of ego that does not seek to assert itself, does not argue, does not demand attention. It exists by making everything around it more comfortable. This is the quiet ego, not born from a desire for control, but from a need for safety and acceptance. Psychologically, this ego forms very early. When a child realizes that expressing their emotions can create tension for others, especially those they depend on, the brain learns a simple strategy: observe, adjust, and limit expression. Over time, that strategy becomes part of the personality, not because the child is weak, but because they are intelligent in the way survival requires. The quiet ego operates on a clear principle: if I do not disturb, everything will be fine. It does not push you to say what you think, it pushes you to consider what others might feel. It does not encourage you to ask questions, it encourages you to maintain harmony. And because it works so effectively, society often rewards it with positive labels: mature, understanding, easy to be around, considerate of others. But at a deeper level, the cost is just as clear. The quiet ego trains you to postpone yourself. You learn to listen to others before listening to yourself. You come to believe that your needs can wait, while other people's needs cannot. This does not create an immediate crisis. It only produces a slow, steady, and almost invisible erosion until you enter emotionally demanding periods, such as the holiday season. At times like these, the quiet ego works harder than ever. It urges you to show up even when you are exhausted. It makes you smile even when there is no energy left. It whispers that keeping the atmosphere right matters more than whether you are actually okay. And because this mechanism is so familiar, you rarely question it. You think this is who you are. You think this is maturity. The key point that must be clearly seen is this: the quiet ego is not the enemy. It was once a reasonable psychological solution at a certain stage of life. But an old solution, when never re-examined, becomes a limitation. When you continue to operate through this mechanism without awareness, you no longer have choice. You only have reflex. Awakening does not come from dismantling this ego, but from understanding it. When you see clearly that your excessive kindness is, in fact, a learned strategy, you begin to reclaim the necessary distance. And it is precisely that distance between you and the old reflex where genuine choice truly begins to appear. There are moments when nothing particular happens. No one says anything more. There is no event significant enough to be named. Everything simply slows down, and within that slowing, you are alone with yourself. You sit there, after everything has been done. No one needs you to say the right thing, smile at the right moment, or keep the atmosphere light. And for the first time in many days, perhaps many years, you notice the state your body is in. Not tired from a long day, but tired in a different way, tired from having been tense for far too long. You begin to notice very small things. That you always know when to stay silent so things don't become awkward. That you are accustomed to smiling before you even ask yourself whether you want to smile. That you tend to attend to other people's emotions faster than you recognize your own. These things never used to make you think. They were simply the way you lived. Until now, here, a paradox becomes strikingly clear. You are always ready to be gentle with others when they are tired. You allow them to need time, to need space, to need rest. But with yourself, you treat exhaustion as something to push through, as if, by trying just a little harder, everything will return to normal. And suddenly, you notice a distance. Not between you and others, but between you and your own lived experience. You are present in many moments, yet rarely fully inside them. You keep everything running smoothly, while you yourself stand slightly to the side, observing. This feeling does not frighten you. It only quiets you, a very still sadness without blame, without resentment, just a sense of mourning for the times you ignored your own signals because you believed they mattered less than collective stability. And then, in a very gentle way, the way you view exhaustion begins to change. It no longer looks like a flaw that needs fixing. It feels like a reminder that perhaps it is time for you to return to a position you left long ago, not at the margins, not behind the scenes, but at the center of the experience that is unfolding. No major decision is made. Only something very small happens. You stop denying that feeling, and in that quiet acknowledgement, another sensation appears, not loud, but enough for you to know that you have just crossed an old boundary. There is a kind of pain that does not come from being hurt, but from having withdrawn from yourself for too long. It is not loud, not dramatic. It simply smolders like a prolonged fatigue whose beginning you can no longer trace. And when you pause long enough to truly feel it, you realize what hurts is not what others have done, but that you have not been there for yourself. This understanding does not bring immediate relief. On the contrary, it may make you feel sadder. Sad because you clearly see the times you stayed silent when you wanted to speak, the times you kept going when you were already depleted, the times you chose to keep everything stable rather than keep yourself truthful and alive. This is the sorrow of awareness. No more blaming, no more avoidance, only the stark truth about the cost of always trying to be easy to live with. Yet precisely at the bottom of that feeling, something else begins to emerge. Not motivation, not determination to change, but a very gentle release. Releasing the idea that you must carry more, releasing the belief that love means making yourself smaller, releasing a role that once kept you safe, but no longer nourishes you. Existential awakening is not the moment you understand everything. It is the moment you stop resisting what you are feeling. When you allow exhaustion to be there, without needing to fix it. When you let sadness pass through, without needing to explain it. And in that allowance, you touch something deeply true. You do not need to become better in order to deserve rest. Perhaps you do not yet know how you will live differently. Perhaps you will still show up, still care, still maintain the connections that matter. But on a very deep level, a shift has already occurred. You no longer use self-sacrifice as the measure of love. You begin to understand that staying with yourself is not turning away from the world, but the only way to truly be in it. And within that very quiet understanding, there is a letting go not of life itself, but of the compulsion to become a version of yourself that everyone finds comfortable, except you. There is a way of living that does not arise from everything becoming perfect, but from no longer having to fight against yourself. It is not loud, not dazzling. It is simply the feeling of being able to stay fully present with whatever is unfolding, even when it is simple, incomplete, or still unfinished. When you stop treating exhaustion as an enemy to overcome, you begin to see life through a different lens. You no longer ask what you must become in order to be worthy. Instead, you start listening to where you are. And within that listening, a familiar rhythm gradually returns. A rhythm not dictated by external expectations, but by the capacity for genuine presence. There are things in life that do not need to be answered once and for all. They only need to be stayed with, long enough. It is the art of living alongside questions without rushing toward conclusions. Serenity is not the absence of emotion, but the state of not being carried away by emotion. You still feel sad when sadness arises, still tired when tiredness comes, but you no longer take these states as evidence that you are living wrongly. Here, the self is no longer something you must go searching for. It appears when you stop trying to become someone else, when you no longer define your worth by how much you sacrifice, how much you endure, or how well you make others feel comfortable. You allow yourself to exist without a reason, without proof, without explanation. Perhaps you will still step into the holiday season. You will still meet others, still care, still show up in the relationships that matter. But your presence now carries a different quality. It is no longer the strain of forcing yourself to fit in, but a conscious choice. You are there because you want to be, not because you have to be. And when you no longer have the energy, you know you have the right to stop without self-blame. The sense of fullness you feel does not come from life suddenly becoming easier. It comes from no longer abandoning yourself in the small moments. You allow yourself to move more slowly, speak less, and feel more, not to become profound, but to become real. And perhaps this is the quietest form of rebirth. Not becoming a new person, but returning to who you were before you learned to shrink, to adjust, and to fall silent in order to survive. In that return, there is no victory, no declaration. There is only something deeply human, living in alignment with the rhythm of your own being. Some stories do not need a clear ending. They only need to close with a silence deep enough for the listener to place themselves within it. When you look back on the journey you have just moved through, you may not see any dramatic change, no decisive resolution, no resounding promise. Only a very different feeling. You no longer have to strain yourself just to stay. You are still you, still sensitive, still noticing more than most, still easily moved by small things. But something has shifted, very subtly. You begin to realize that kindness toward others does not have to come at the cost of forgetting yourself. That presence does not necessarily mean sacrifice. And that love, if there is no place for you within it, will sooner or later run dry. The holiday season will pass. The gatherings will end. The well wishes will fade. What remains is not how well you fulfilled your role, but how you stayed with yourself during those days. Perhaps you chose to leave earlier. Perhaps you spoke less. Perhaps you allowed yourself not to show up everywhere. These choices do not need to be explained. They only need to be respected first and foremost by you. If there is one hope being replanted here, it is not the hope that everything will become easier. It is the hope that you will be gentler with yourself. Gentle when you are tired. Gentle when you are sad. Gentle when you are not ready. Because moving forward is not always about advancing. Sometimes it is simply about standing still long enough not to lose yourself. And if you are listening to these words in a very quiet moment, know that you do not need to change right away. You do not need to understand everything. You do not need to become someone else. You only need to carry this recognition, very softly, into the days ahead, like a quiet reminder that you, too, deserve to be included in the circle of care you offer to the world. The story closes here, not as a final period, but like a door left slightly ajar, open enough for the light to remain, and open enough for you to step through, at your own pace.